Hello, Repliters, and welcome to Behind the Code, where we really nerd out about features that have come to Replit recently. We're starting this series by talking about a feature that everybody and their nan has asked us for, which is themes. And I'm here with Sergei, who's an engineer on the Workspace team, who was responsible for bringing us the remarkable themes. Hello, Sergei.
Hey David, thanks so much for the intro.
Oh, well, you did the work. I just say the words. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Replit to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, I'm Sergey. I'm an engineer here at Replit. Um, I work primarily on the workspace team, which is kind of our term for the IDE itself, as well as the infrastructure around it that helps us power a lot of those features. But I also kind of delve into a lot of out of workspace product stuff, as I did in this case with themes, and starting to kind of work more across the board entirely. Um, but yeah, I've worked on a lot of user-facing features, as with this one, and a lot of kind of behind the scenes performance stability work. But I was really super excited about this project, especially.
And it's a project that lots of people have been requesting for a while. So tell us
Mhm.
about themes. Tell us about the inception of the idea and what it is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's obviously something that a lot of other editors have support for, um, and it's something that a lot of our users have been asking for a long time as well. Like with any tool, especially one that you use every day, every week, that you create things, you spend a lot of meaningful time in. You kind of want to make it your own. Like you want to be able to customize it. You want it to look as good as you want it to. Um, and so I think we kind of wanted to bring that to Replit in our own unique way. Of course, like lots of different products have themes, especially other code editors. But yeah, we just wanted to really kind of make it stand out and give it kind of the Replit-y experience. And so yeah, I think it came out largely out of one being intuitive that a product like ours should have custom theming. Like you should be able to customize the colors and especially the syntax highlighting. But two, a lot of users kind of had requested it over the years as well. So it was pretty obviously on our um, kind of on our plate the whole time.
So I'll start with a difficult question then. It From my experience of working at Replit, it seems to be something that people have been clamoring for a long time. So why did it take so long? What was the reason for the long development of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, as you mentioned, it had been one of our most requested features, if not the most requested feature at Replit over the course of the last couple of years. Um, and I think the only reason that it hadn't got done as quickly as I think a lot of people had anticipated it is just prioritization. Like there really wasn't much of a better reason than that. The reality was, up until relatively recently, arguably still, we were a pretty small team. When I joined, we were only 12 people. And we're building a really complex product, and we wanted to continually make it more powerful, make it more intuitive. And I think that just like purely kind of visual features like this didn't fall super high on the rankings. In retrospect, we probably could have prioritized this sooner, but we were working on so many exciting things in the interim that like I think. It was hard to say like what was more important, but yeah. So the main reason really was prioritization. Um, in terms of like technical limitations, I would say that one of the barriers that kind of would have definitely made it much more difficult to implement than recently was kind of the implementation of our UI library. It's called Rui Replit UI, which under the hood uses a lot of CSS tokens. And kind of when we made that migration in mid to late 2021, that really unblocked a lot of the work that kind of enabled us to build this in the first place, because it kind of standardized the UI and it made it very trivial to create kind of different sets of themes with this CSS variable based approach, because these variables were just declared globally and you can change them from anywhere. Um, Whereas like previously we had styling kind of all across the board in different components and it wasn't really in one central unified place. Um, So I would say like that work, it was the only real technical barrier for us to get started. So, mentally 2021, we probably could have started work on this, but I think it took a while because we had so much going on during that time. We were working on the mobile app. We were always working on editor improvements, making the product more powerful, so on and so forth. So
You talk about prioritization a lot there. How do you prioritize the work to do something like this, and how do you sort of signpost your way along the development path?
yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's a surprisingly difficult problem. That's one thing I discovered working on teams in general, and also on kind of larger, more ambitious projects like this. Is prioritization is always going to be a struggle. Um, I would say there's different kind of ways of going about it. There's certainly no standard, and we have some flexibility internally as to how we prioritize things. But
Mhm.
the way that I tend to look at it is it starts with a good scope. So scoping out kind of the work that it is that you want to implement within this time a certain time frame or a certain project, which can be surprisingly difficult to do with something as ambiguous as custom themes because there's so many different directions you can go with it. There's so much that you can potentially add or choose to focus on or not focus on, and so on and so forth. Scope creep is real, and it's often a pretty difficult problem. But basically, it starts with scoping things out, figuring out what the kind of MVP and what it is that you're working towards, what you want out into the world, and then just breaking it up into kind of digestible milestones and goals. And so the way we tend to do things is we have kind of three separate launches for some of our big projects, or like milestones, if you will. The
Mhm.
first of which is internal. So we want to get something that kind of Repliters inside the company can use and kind of start to give us feedback immediately, even if it's not in a 100% completed state. The next is to explorers, which is, as many people know, are kind of term for beta users, essentially people that sign up for early access to potentially broken features. And then lastly, to kind of general users, the rollout. And the rollout usually isn't overnight. It might take a week or two or however long. Um, but that's kind of the last milestone. Like this is 100% production ready within the scope of what it is we outlined. And so those are the different milestones, and there's a different set of kind of tasks and goals that are associated with each. Like the things that are the bare minimum to release internally is going to be different as to what we could or is acceptable to release to our beta users, and what is good enough for prod. So obviously, there's different standards to each. There's different things that might be missing or not quite feature parity with each kind of set of milestones, but that helps us break it down. Um, and of course, these kind of milestones might themselves be several weeks, if not a month or two or more apart. Um, and so within that, you might have different kind of goals, different subtasks, if you will.
Mhm.
And we use Asana as our task manager internally, and so we kind of make heavy use of that to as a task tracker. We have kind of we have a lot of communication on Slack and a weekly sync and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of kind of communication on a weekly basis and often on a daily basis as far as like what the like largest priority is to help us hit those goals. But that's roughly how we think about it.
Great, thank you. I wanted to pick up on one thing you said there because when you're talking about the signposts, there seems like three obvious places there where you get feedback that doesn't go as well as you expect. And what do you do in that circumstances? And sort of bouncing off from that, then, are there any software development methodologies that you subscribe to or that we subscribe to internally that help you deal with those and jump back and forth in the development process?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that there isn't any kind of particular methodology that I subscribe to. I know a lot of people talk about various things like agile and whatnot.
Mhm.
I would say for me, I've never found it useful to have like a particularly explicit framework around it. I just know that like kind of from experience that I have a certain kind of framework that I like to work with, and certain people on the team do as well. And you kind of can adjust to other people who are working with you. Like everyone has different working styles and preferences and whatnot, so it always helps to factor those in. But I know for me, like there's a number of things that help me be more productive. So, for example, making like really good use of of that task tracker, whether it's Asana or another tool that you use, being really explicit about kind of those goals, especially making sure that everyone is on the same team, and then even at the like very granular like subtask level, um, making sure like the description for each is detailed, um, and it's like clear what everyone's working towards. So I think that's important. Kind of a fast iteration and communication loop is really important. So again, like we use Slack very heavily. We have a weekly sync where we make sure to talk about any kind of open questions that we have for the week and what the priorities are. Um, Being able to iterate really quickly. So especially in the early stages, being able to like demo prototypes, try new things out, take those kind of risks, um, and making good use of deadlines, I think is really important. That's one thing that I think is more difficult and also like more ambiguous. Like a lot of people don't like deadlines. I think they are a good they're good when they're used correctly, essentially. And I like that it gives you kind of a uh, something to work towards, essentially, like a date that everyone agrees on, that we say, hey, like we can get this done by this date, and sticking to that, and being able to work towards a date that's many weeks or months in advance, and structure each week, break it down in such a way that you can get there realistically is a hard challenge, but it's a skill that you can kind of work towards over time.
We've all seen features that have clearly been given a release date in advance of them being developed, and they arrive in other products half formed. Would it be fair to say that we treat deadlines more as a nicety, like something that we would like to work to, and we're happy to be flexible on it if the feature's not up to scratch?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say internally it's never been like super rigorous. Like the deadline is something that we work towards, but we're okay kind of being flexible with or pushing, because ultimately what matters is we ship a quality feature or upgrade to the product in a timely manner.
Mhm.
And sometimes like there's always a compromise with the deadline. It's not like, oh, it's better to have something a week uh, from now than now. Of course, like that makes sense. But typically you're obviously giving up something. Maybe that's quality. Maybe that's like less time or effort on that particular feature or work. Um, so yeah, I think like we're very pragmatic in terms of making decisions to push something back, and I think it depends on each person and each team to make that decision and like when they're okay doing so. But I know for me, like I love sticking to deadlines and being able to do that, because I think it's like a forcing function for getting something done earlier. And otherwise, like I think things might take too long, and like the scope creep becomes more of an issue, because now you're like, oh, we have more time, so we should add this feature. um, and so, yeah, I like it, but I'm always okay pushing something back if it means we have more time, um, to improve the quality or to fix something that's urgent. And of course, sometimes things come up, maybe even last minute, that you're never going to be able to predict every aspect of the work months in advance. There's always surprises. Every big project I worked on, and sometimes those surprises take surprisingly long. And so, of course, like you should be able to adjust your deadlines accordingly. But you have a problem when you're doing that for every project or super
Mhm.
consistently. Then that's a time where you should probably readjust, because your estimates aren't quite working.
So, speaking of surprises, what were the biggest surprises as you were developing themes? And I'm thinking in terms of things that were complex, more so than you thought, or easier than you thought, or even just the time it took to develop a certain feature.
I would say the real struggle of themes was less technical and more kind of from a product perspective. Um, so a lot of the kind of surprising things for us were just around like how one, like this the scope of how we wanted to use this, and two, like I would say one of the most surprising things for me was how our users ended up using it, and how kind of popular and immediately um, how immediately popular it became, essentially. it was really cool to see the themes.
Have a look. Sorry, I think
Sorry.
this is probably a good point to bring it up if that's okay.
Oh
And
yeah, absolutely.
please do carry on because you're talking about the popularity there, and it
Oh
was
yeah, yeah.
shockingly fast, wasn't it? How quickly people adopted it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was very quick adoption, and to go through some of the themes, for example, you can go to the themes explore page here. It was just really cool to see, like, over the course of, yeah, honestly, days and weeks even, but especially months of people having created so many amazing popular themes. The community really loved it, and you can see like our most installed theme is approaching 50,000 installs. We have many over 10,000, many more over 1,000. So they're really being used pretty frequently, and you can see with a lot of these, a lot of them have the same author here because some people just became really prolific and decided to copy various themes over from other popular platforms. So it's really cool to see just how like far people went with it. Um, the other thing that was really cool was the number of unique themes that we've seen. So, for example, I recall seeing like a transparent theme. We can search by title here. Transparent. Oh yeah. So one of our users ended up making a fully transparent theme, which was pretty hilarious. So you can see when I preview, you can't see anything, which is of course not very useful, but it is really fun. So I think it's awesome to see how creative people got with it. Another one that came up was the Wingdings font theme. Somebody figured out how to add fonts to themes, and you can see here with the preview that this is absolute gibberish, but you can actually code in Wingdings now on Replit. And that just like we would have never guessed that someone was going to go and do something like that. So I thought that was pretty fun. There's stuff like the terminal, which is super neat. Throwback to the Matrix. So yeah,
So the surprising thing is when you get it in the hands of the users and they do something unexpected with it.
yeah, exactly. I would say like you can't. That's not going to be the case for every feature. Some things are more or less more straightforward, but with something where you have as much kind of creativity as themes, I think it's really awesome to see that and to see just how popular they got from day one. I mean, initially we had this kind of chicken and egg problem when we launched the explore page, of like, oh hey, like there aren't really any themes for you to explore yet, right? Because we just launched the feature. But as it turns out that, and so we were planning to have kind of to be able to seed it a little bit better and reach out to people in our community and do a lot more kind of promotion internally for people to create and publish their own themes. But honestly, it wasn't much of an issue, and within a few days, it was already we'd reached our first theme with over 1,000 installs, and it was already like tracking very very highly with in terms of popularity. So it was super cool to see that happen.
I suppose to give people some element of context, we've got 20 million registered users. So we are, the thousands and thousands of people that have installed the themes is just scratching the surface. One thing I think interesting for me was the big themes initially were ports, weren't they? And you said yourself that people like to have consistency in everywhere they work, and I
Hmm.
certainly do. I find that without the right theme, I get frustrated because I'm so used to looking at certain color combinations.
Hmm.
But having said that, now we're in this creative part of it where all the most popular themes have been ported, so people
Hmm.
are doing the creative things. So I just think that's really fascinating. So thank you so much for building it because we're seeing some amazing things appearing as a result.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's awesome. I was so excited to see how quickly like some of my favorite themes came up. Like for example, I know Nord is a big one. You can see like this is a theme that I use locally a lot of the time, and you can see that there's already like nearly 10 of those. Dracula is another popular one, and you can see like it's not one person or two people who are going and making these. I mean, a lot of users are recreating their favorite themes, and so you have a ton to choose from. VS Code Dark being our number one theme. Obviously, that's something that is popular with a lot of people. Um, and so let's see what else is good. Solarized. Basically every theme that you might imagine from other editors has been recreated, 5, 10, 15, 20 times, and it's pretty crazy. It really validates kind of the demand that this feature had.
So before I get into some more sort of specific questions, I want to bring up one of my favorite features is the fact that when you're porting a theme or you're bringing something over, you can actually use the color picker in your normal desktop UI, which I
Hmm.
think is absolute genius. Would you like to talk a little bit about that feature and where that came from, those ideas?
Oh yeah, for sure. So yeah, so for the color picker, I mean, we wanted to make the process of creating themes really fun and intuitive, but also powerful. And so, luckily, like the browser has a lot of kind of built-in, um, uh, kind of features to help you ship that. One of which is like the default native browser color picker, and that out of the box like is pretty great for what we're trying to do. We also have a text input where you can just like paste in hex codes and RGB as well. There's tons of different formats that supports, but yeah, the color picker is super fun. The other thing that we do, if you go visit your account and edit one of your themes here, maybe you have a dark mode theme. Um, One of the neat things here is the ability to live preview. So of course, like we're using the color picker, but it's really awesome to kind of see these changes reflected live, and you can disable the previewing as well if it's too distracting. But it's just fun, and you can type in here as well and just see this stuff happen in front of you, and it's honestly just kind of fun. Like,
Yeah. I think
um,
you've also done a
so
really good job of making like the syntax highlighting fun as well, because so many people program but don't know the exact technical terms for every aspect of the syntax. But the way you've built the preview, where you can just hover over each part of it, is fantastic. I think.
yeah, thank you. I'm actually glad you brought that up because that was one of the most, I would say that was easily one of the most difficult kind of aspects of themes to build. Again, less so from a technical perspective, although the technical work was pretty non-trivial in terms of making you customize the values of the editor dynamically like this. But um, the hardest part was from a product perspective, right? Because like with the editor that we use, CodeMirror, it exposes a ton of different kind of like the grammar will basically mark all of these tokens as some sort of tag, right? So you have like variable names, keywords, property names, so on and so forth. Um, and the grammar gets really complex, and it's also different on a language to language basis. I mean, there's largely a ton of similarities. For example, just about every language has a variable name and keywords and so on. But there's a ton of differences in terms of how they're implied, as well as the set of tags that are supported. And a lot of them are just like really technical and unintuitive, and it only makes sense to know the intricacies if you are developing language grammars or you're working on or developing like syntax highlighting. And so one of the hardest things for us to do from a product perspective was one, figure out how to expose everything in an intuitive way such that these like potentially complex um, tags and syntax highlighting concepts are kind of approachable for users. But two, also make it kind of comprehensive enough to be powerful, such that for any different language, and you can see we have in the preview a bunch of drop downs for you to try out maybe what it looks like in Python or Ruby or Java, that we expose enough that it's actually useful, that you can color code a majority, if not all, of the code that you would see day to day with this feature, but still keep it a short list because this list could be 5 times as long, and we probably wouldn't cover every single thing that you could possibly style. So that was hard, and I'd say part of the one of the difficulties as well was user education, and there's a different number of different kind of features that we employed to help that. One of which is like this tooltip preview, so you can kind of see a description of what each tag is here. And the other, which is the feature that you mentioned, was the hover preview. So this was super cool. This was probably one of the more technically challenging things to build, but it was really fun. But we were essentially thinking as we were building this, like, hey, like, okay, now we have this like relatively short list. We have some descriptions, but like, it's not obvious what token maps to what in the code, right? Like some things are might be more clear, again, like variable names, keywords, that might be kind of more intuitive. But the grammar and the syntax hiding for each language is really complex. And so what if instead you could just hover over a given kind of piece of code, like any text here, and even you can see like different characters as well, like the brace, uh, and the different operators, and you can just not only see what the tag is in line, what it corresponds to in the short list that we have, but also its value, and to be able to customize its value directly in line right here. So I can make this operator, and you can see everything that you might expect as an operator here, like the plus sign, the equal sign, is changing live right in front of you, and you don't have to be kind of confused and kind of spraying and praying here with the values and figuring out what exactly like this is and what last name here is and what new here is and how it corresponds to the list. You don't have to kind of try to keep guessing. You can just
Mhm.
highlight over and it will tell you right away, and you can in fact change it in line as well. So that was kind of one of the more fun things to work on.
Yeah, you've done a great job with this, honestly. I mean, I was setting up a theme and there was a difference between two of them that I wasn't 100% sure of, but it was
Mm-hmm.
just nice to be able to go and highlight bits and go, ah, that makes sense. But with that in mind and the sort of the complexity of the challenge, what was easier to build than you thought it would be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say what was easier was this kind of like the syntax highlighting was a little bit more complex, but the global token coloring was made pretty easy. In fact, we had built a simplified version of this in our hackathon, um, in our Hack Week in 2021, about a year ago now. Um, and we largely reused a lot of the same code. And the reason that that was easier than expected was because of kind of the aforementioned work that we had done over the course of the last year or two with our UI library, Rui, um, and the kind of CSS variables that we're using. Essentially, we had already set up the foundation to enable some of this work. So under the hood, this is pretty straightforwardly like making some using the browser API to change the value of these CSS variables. And so it's that part is actually not that hard to build, despite the fact that it makes for a really cool demo and you can just change these colors so quickly. Um, but as opposed to something like the syntax hiding, which took a lot more work to enable our editor to support something.
Would it be fair to say that when you're setting up the roadmap for something like this, it's years in advance? It seems to me like some of the changes that were made to Rui were made with one eye on we'd like to do themes one day. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say like a lot of Rui solved a lot of problems for us, and there's a reason that we invested so heavily in making our own UI library. And one of them, yes, was custom themes. So when we started working on that in, I believe, mid 2021, um, we had a couple engineers on it, and one of the stated goals for the project and investing several months of our time on a UI library was to support something like custom themes. um, but of course, like there were lots of other problems that it solved that perhaps took priority, one of which is, for example, UI consistency across the website, um, which is a problem that any kind of web app or product with the scale of ours would run into. But yeah, one of the nice things that it gave us was themes out of the box. So we tend to have this kind of engineering culture Replit where we make these kind of big bets and we make these big investments that the other companies might kind of stray away from because it's not always like the immediate benefit isn't super clear at all times, or potentially might not be worth it, but the long term implications uh, um, are great, and we see the benefits many months, if not years, in advance. And one of those long-term bets was actually CodeMirror. So switching to this editor that you see here from Monaco, which is what VS Code uses, the open source editor that Microsoft maintains, was also a huge bet, and that coincidentally helped unblock this theme's work as well in a pretty major way. I would say it would be very difficult for me to tell you how we would implement custom syntax highlighting like this in Monaco, but it would not be trivial. It would not be nearly as easy and powerful, especially some creating like a preview like this as it was in CodeMirror for us. So the fact that we switched to this new editor enabled us to create much more advanced and granular editor features like this, where we might not have. In the same vein that switching to Rui enabled customizing the colors of the entire site really easily. And so both of them, in effect, unblock themes, and they were both kind of minor aspects of the project and goals for the project, rather.
It's great to hear. How do you go about testing something like this? Because it feels to me like, it's not the sort of thing that you can test entirely from a programmatic way. It's not the sort of thing you can test entirely from a testing table. It feels
Hmm.
like it's the sort of thing that's tested better by giving it to people and seeing what they break. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say you're right in identifying that this is quite hard to test. But we, with themes like with most features, we kind of have like different. We have like a pretty, a number of different types of tests in our test suite. So of course you could have like unit tests for various kind of functions that get called, um, like like methods that like callbacks that get called here for these different editing these values and such.
I know a lot of independent developers that shy away from unit tests, but all it is really, if I'm right, is just a way of programmatically testing that you haven't broken something when you're adding new features. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. A unit test is just testing kind of one specific piece of functionality in isolation. And so we have some of that. We have integration tests, which is, kind of larger, or like zoomed out a little bit from unit tests, which is testing a number of pieces and how they integrate together. And then lastly, we have end-to-end tests, which spin up a whole browser and will test a feature end to end. Um, and like as a user would. So it would click various elements, it would type in text and so on and so forth. And so I would say like with a feature like this, it was much more difficult um, to rely on unit tests and integration tests just because of the nature of how like UI heavy it was and how much like user interaction there was. And so we leaned a lot more on the end-to-end testing side of things. And so, for example, we have an end-to-end test, which again will spin up a live browser and programmatically kind of do things in a way a user would in terms of like clicking buttons and typing text, um, and that creates a new theme, updates a theme, views its cover page, applies it, and publishes it. So we essentially chose to rely more so on end-to-end tests for something like this. That said, in the early days, especially when we didn't have, we were developing this feature, and so we hadn't gotten around to writing a lot of these tests. We relied on a lot of manual testing as well, so that helped. Which is why we have these release cycles of putting it to admins first, and then to our explorers, and then kind of to the public, so that we can iron out a lot of these things manually just through usage first, and then we can spend the time and write a really kind of robust set of tests around them to make sure that they don't regress.
It's fascinating. Thank you. You've talked a little bit about the impact after the release, but I suppose what I want to ask is from that, what's next on the to do list?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a ton of things that we had set aside for future work because we wanted to get this out to the world. Um, but there's obviously a lot of different features that we're considering adding in the future. I can't promise any timelines, but hopefully soon. One of which is custom fonts. So that's a big one. A lot of people want native support for custom fonts. As you saw in the Wingdings font theme that I showed earlier, some of our users were able to hack around that. Essentially, our GraphQL API is a bit more permissive than the UI will allow you to. So people were just able to make those requests. Um, but yeah, so custom fonts is a big one because that's a big part of theming in lots of other kind of apps and especially in IDEs. Um, and we also want kind of more granular support for different token types and syntax highlighting types. So we have kind of a short static list here right now, but we could potentially see down the line, like of you being able to have a more advanced menu here and customize things that aren't natively supported now. So that's one big example. Um, so yeah, just essentially making themes more powerful and more flexible. Those are anything that helps us do that, whether that's custom fonts and support for more advanced kind of drop down types. And of course, this is a small list of the CSS variables that we support in our app currently. This will get you kind of 95% of the way there, but there might be other tokens or aspects of the UI that you can customize down the line. And so those are the kind of things we're thinking about, just how to make themes more powerful.
That sounds very exciting. And the last question, which I'll try and finish on with everyone we interview, but you built this. I'm sure there's some tiny little feature that you're really, really proud of that people overlook. What is it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say if I had to pick one, it was probably the one that you had alluded to earlier, which was this hover preview. That was a super fun thing to build, and it was surprisingly complex. In a lot of ways, we're kind of pushing the boundaries of what our editor allowed us to do. Um, so yeah, this little hover preview here, where you can just hover over any piece of text in the code, and it will show you what tag it's associated with and let you change its value in line. That was one of the more difficult things to work on. But also just the syntax highlighting editing in general was pretty non-trivial and pretty fun to build. Because again, I think like most editors and most online editors and IDEs like don't expect to have so many kind of changing values, so many customizable values at once. And so I think again we were doing some pretty novel stuff here in terms of being able to target so many aspects of your syntax highlighting in code and make it work across so many different languages. That it was really exciting to be able to kind of do that and build support for it and make it pretty fun.
So again, I think I speak for all of us when I say thank you for themes. And thank you very much for this interview. And we hope that you found it interesting and illuminating to look behind the code at Replit. Sergei, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate the convo.
I look forward to the next time a feature's released that I can chat to you about. Thank you.
All right. Hopefully soon. Thanks.